Morning, everyone. This is Ezekiel Trezevant, Las Vegas Raiders beat writer for Las Vegas Raiders on SI, co-beat writer, I should say, and co-host. As always, guys, thank you for joining me, Raider Nation, and really anyone who decides to hop on here. Thank you for joining me, Raider Nation or not. But as always, guys, let's get to it. I love doing this, guys. I love talking and kind of getting the thoughts out in terms of everything Raiders related. And here it is, game day. They're facing the 1-4 Tennessee Titans, and the cool thing about this is that usually what I do is whenever I prepare for these, I kind of look up different statistics. I'm not a big stats guy, but certain things I do believe kind of give you an idea of what's going to happen or what can happen, what should happen. And as I kind of start getting to looking into those things, I'm reminded that these are two 1-4 football teams playing against each other. And when you're looking into the Titans, I think there's 1-4. The Raiders are 1-4, but the Titans are 1-4, and they should be 0-5. So with that said, this is a game that the Raiders should win. But we all know that when it comes to the NFL, that should and actually doing are two different things. But again, let's get right to it. First and foremost, let's kind of take a step back, and you guys know I do this every game. I feel like you can't talk about the game the day of without going looking the week back, and I think that's especially the case when you're on a 4-game losing streak. Last week I think in terms of the Colts game. It was brutal. It was brutal. There's no way around it. But at the same time, the Colts are just a really, 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 really good team. I mean, you don't get to be, so just like the Titans should probably be 0-5. I think the Colts going into last week, they probably should have been 5-0 going into last week. If their receiver didn't throw the ball out the back of the end zone when he's running in to score a touchdown, I'm not sure that the Rams win that game. And then again, the Raiders should have been facing an undefeated Colts team. So did anyone necessarily see it being as bad as it was against the Colts? No, but I don't think any of us are surprised because those guys are just good, and they are a possession or two away from blowing the gates wide open. And that's what happened when the Raiders and the Colts played. And the Colts are a possession or two away from opening the floodgates on anyone when they had those extra possessions or two. But when you give them the extra possessions or two, like the Raiders have been giving away, on the turnovers and things of that nature, the Colts are just bound to do that to you. So as hard as that was to watch, I don't think most people would have expected this Raiders team to go to Indy and win that game. Now, probably be a little bit more competitive, yes, but at the same time, I mean, I'm not sure about that when you consider the holes that the Raiders have. Which again, that's really the first thing that's worth talking about, and it impacts this game, but it impacts really everything they do. And I think that's the injury. I know that's the injury to Brock Bowers, and everybody says that injuries are every team has injuries, which is true. But every team doesn't have a Brock Bowers, and I would go on to say this as well. It's not just having Brock Bowers on the field. Brock has to be healthy. Brock has to be 100% healthy. Now, luckily for the Raiders, Brock, even if he's 75%, he's still relatively good. But we're talking about NFL defenses, and a 75% or a 60% Brock Bowers is just not going to get the job done. Opposing defensive coordinators are not good. They didn't believe that Brock was healthy. If you guys remember the first game of the season, when Brock started limping I want to say it was like mid play. He was running up, I want to say on the left side of the field, cut up left if I'm not mistaken, and he started kind of running mid stride and started limping mid stride. That's not an injury that's gonna go away the next week or the 2 weeks after that or the 3 weeks after that. So, in my opinion, I'm glad that the Raiders decided to rest and to sit Brock Bowers. Personally, and I've got a couple of people, including Hondo, who can confirm this, but I have felt like they should have sat him after the first game of the season, maybe even after the second game of the season. Now, I completely understand why they did not, because to a certain degree, resting Brock Bowers that early in the season it could send the wrong message, or it could have sent the wrong message. But I think when you roll him out there for X amount of games, 3, 4, 5 games, and it's clear that he's not himself, okay, I think they're doing right by the player by sitting him down, even more so because they're 1-4. I listen, I do not think it's hyperbole. I said it, in an article. I typed it, and I'll verbally say it here. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that if things went his way, Brock Bowers has the potential to be the best tight end in NFL history. He has that potential. Now, we all know what potential means, and he needs some things to go his way, such as staying healthy, which he is not healthy this year, such as a good quarterback situation that doesn't change year to year. That would help Brock out, and just a consistent offense. Unfortunately, it looked like that this year could have been that year where the entire offense is built around Brock, and he could have really taken off. But again, it goes back to being healthy, right? So the greatest ability is availability, and unfortunately, Brock is not available. So I think what we all have to keep in mind, what everyone has to keep in mind, is that yes, every team has injuries. But again, not every team has a Brock Bowers on their team, and that impacts everything you do, especially when the entire offense. Some people might disagree in terms of how much of the offense was built around Brock Bowers. But I would venture to say that a decent amount, over 50%, if you ask me, at least 50%, let's say at least 50%, if you ask me, is built around having, at the very least, having Brock Bowers on the field. Not necessarily throwing it to him all the time, but having him on the field as a threat. A decent amount of the offense is built around Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer being on that football field. Obviously, a little bit more Brock than Michael, but Michael's a legitimate tight end in my opinion as well. So you got to have Brock Bowers out there. Him not being out there impacts everything. To a certain degree, I feel bad for any offensive coordinator that takes this job and they don't have Brock Bowers when they thought that they would have Brock Bowers going in. That's difficult. And as much as it's on the coaches, the coaching staff, to figure out how to win with the players they have, I mean, if you're out there without your best players, I'm sorry, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to do that. And you got to remember, even with Brock on the field, even with Colton on the field, even with a fully healthy squad, the Raiders were still struggling. So now you take away Brock Bowers, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to struggle. Like, I think that's just how it goes. Now, is that an excuse to a certain degree? No, they have to figure out how to make it without Brock. It's too early in the season to say we don't have Brock, throw our hands up in the air. It's not going to happen. It's not going to work that way. So they have to figure it out. But no one can underestimate how important it is that they do not have Brock Bowers, and not just have him on the field, but Brock Bowers needs to be 100% healthy. I think that, case in point, week 2, Chargers game. A lot of the times, if I'm not mistaken, it was Derwin James that they had, on a lot of times on Brock. Well, a healthy Derwin James versus a Brock Bowers at 75%. That's it. Derwin James is going to win that, right? And I use Derwin because he's a divisional opponent. It's easy to kind of get that visual, but replace Derwin for any, for most starting caliber defensive backs in the leagues, especially of Derwin's physical nature. You need Brock healthy. You need Brock healthy. And just like we spoke about Brock, Colton Miller. And I won't go too big on Colton in terms of him not being there because I spoke about that last week. But between those two, right, it's not like you don't have Colton and you have Brock. You don't have Colton or Brock. That's difficult. That's difficult for anyone to come back to come back from. That's difficult for any play caller to work without your best players, right? So I think those are huge. Obviously, the Raiders just announced that, or I shouldn't say just announced, but they did announce going into the weekend that Brock was going to be out again, and that Michael Mayer should be good. So next point, again, Raiders offense, because if you ask me, that is the area they need the most work at. And I think we can all agree on that. They need the most work, which that's not a bad thing. They're in week 6 and they're working with the new offensive coordinator. They're working with a new head coach, a new quarterback, a new running back, a different center than they had last year. These things take time, and they take time even if everything was going your way health-wise. And that's not the case for the Raiders. So you can imagine where they are in terms of, progress, right? You're trying to progress with injuries and you're trying to progress with a lot of new pieces. You get what you have, basically where they are now. Another thing I think is interesting. Chip Kelly brought this up. He brought up the fact that balance is a issue. Balance is a thing that he keeps in mind, which every play caller does, right? Nobody wants to go out there and pass it a bunch. Nobody wants to go out there and run it, overly so. However, I think to a certain degree, maybe searching for that balance is what's holding the Raiders offense back a little bit. They have to, in my opinion, they have to get out. They have to think outside the box, right? It can't be as much of, hey, let's find balance. No, just move the ball down the field however you can do that. I also think that trying to find balance when your quarterback is struggling as much as he is, I think that is the time to get away from balance, right? Like if you have to, and this is not a knock on Geno, you can replace Geno with whatever quarterback you want to put in there. If he is leading the league in interceptions, maybe I don't need to balance the game plan with passing it just as much as I run the ball. Now, that goes to another issue that the Raiders have, is that they can't consistently run the ball. And that's why you say, hey, if we can't consistently run the ball, maybe we should be a little bit more balanced. But should you, right? And I'm not saying necessarily run it up the gut every time or run it with Ashton every time, but you have Raheem there. You can run to the left side, the right side, up the middle, off the tackle. There's so many different ways that I would imagine Chip Kelly, as the highest paid offensive coordinator in the league, can figure out how to get the ground game going. And in my opinion, the ground game, as you guys can imagine, another part of that is getting the ball to the Ashton and to the Raheem Mosterts out of the backfield. That's an extension of the run game, right? So although they're struggling to maybe run the ball out of the backfield, find a creative way to get the ball in your running back's hands and out of your quarterback's hands. That's leading the league in interceptions. Now, again, that doesn't mean to go out there and run 50 times. They're not equipped to do that. But at the same time, I think looking for balance when your quarterback is leading the league in interceptions, I think that's counterproductive. Case in point, Geno's first interception against the Colts last Sunday, that pass that he threw that was tipped up in the red zone and intercepted, that was his fourth pass in a row on that drive. Go back and look. They once they crossed midfield on that drive, they passed the ball, if I'm not mistaken, 4 times, that interception being the fourth. Out of those 4 passes, if I'm not mistaken, it was the interception itself. It was a 33-yard completion. It was a sack, and then I want to say another incompletion. So you pass the ball 4 times in a row, and you got a sack, an incompletion, an interception. That is literally my point. Run the ball, right? Or find a way to get the ball out of Geno's hands quicker. You got to help him out. And while we're on it, let's talk about Geno. I think it's not really kind of, it's the elephant in the it's the elephant in the room. But at the same time, when you play quarterback in the National Football League for a storied franchise like the Raiders, that comes with a certain amount of, exposure. Now I know Geno's played in New York. He's played in a lot of different places that have similar exposure, but the Raiders are the Raiders. And I think a lot of people know what it means to be a part of the Raider, or they think they know what it means to be a part of the Raiders from the outside looking in. And I think when you get in between those doors and you kind of see how things go, you start to kind of realize that things are a little bit different than you thought, especially if you are struggling on the field. And I think that's a little bit of what Geno was going through right now. I do think Geno was pressing too hard. I do think Geno was trying too hard. I do think he wants it. That's the thing. And you got to think about what we've seen the last couple of seasons. I'm not going to say that every quarterback or every player didn't want it, but I can tell you that just from looking at Geno, I know at the very least he wants to be successful. At the very least, he's trying to be successful. And when we've seen him in practice, he was being successful, and it just hasn't translated to game day. So, in terms of Geno, they got to find a way to help him out. Also, keep in mind that some of this is not. I want to say some, but I think a decent amount of this is not necessarily Geno's fault. Listen, we can spend all day bashing the quarterback. Geno has to be better. Geno knows he needs to be better. I personally think that Geno can do some things differently as well. But at the end of the day, when you're a franchise that is, Geno is the sixth starting quarterback they have had from since 2023, 23, 24, and this year. So that's basically about 2.5 seasons. The last 2.5 seasons, they have had six, including Geno, six different starting quarterbacks. If you've had six different quarterbacks in the last 2.5 years, that means they've all struggled, because you wouldn't be on number six if they didn't struggle. So is it all Geno's fault, or are some of these things issues that were there before that the other five quarterbacks struggled with? That's not favoritism. That's not being biased. That is just facts. That's big facts. Six quarterbacks in 2.5 seasons. And guess what? If Kenny Pickett starts this year, that's going to be seven. So think about it. It's not necessarily all Geno. Now, again, the starting point, not the conclusion, is that Geno needs to be better. I think that goes without saying. You lead the league in interceptions with 9, and going into week 6, you need to be better. Geno feels like a decent amount of them were tipped. I think if Geno went back and looked, I think Geno might disagree, right, in terms of what the big eye in the sky says. But at the end of the day, Geno has to be better. Personally, I think that goes without saying. Once you say that he needs to be better, you can also look at the facts. Brock Bowers is hurt. Colton Miller is hurt. You need progress at a lot of different places that they don't have right now. And guess what? Guess who that all falls back on? The quarterback. So listen, at the end of the day, I think that's part of what comes with whatever Geno's getting paid, $80 million, I think it is, something like that. That comes with the price tag. Being able to accept the blame, especially when you are at fault, that comes with the price tag, and that is kind of where Geno's at. The good news is that they play the Titans today, so that should give you a chance to that should give Geno a chance to kind of bounce back. However, if he does not bounce back against the Tennessee Titans, it, listen, and I'm not necessarily saying if they lose. If Geno struggles, there's only going to be more questions, and rightfully so. Though that's part of everybody's job. Us in the media, his teammates, his coaches, we can't watch Geno throw X amount of interceptions to lead the league in interceptions, and there not be any questions, and there not be some critiques. But listen, that's part of the game. Geno's been owning up to it as best as he can, but these guys are professionals. There's only so much standing at the podium and saying it's my fault that a player or a coach can do. At the end of the day, you have to go do it. And I think that's where the guys are. That was the vibe that I felt in the locker room. There wasn't a whole lot of talking in the locker room this week. To me, that felt like they knew, hey, this is it. Not guaranteeing wins by any mean, but you got to beat the Titans. You can't go 1-5. You can't lose to the Titans and go on a 5-game losing streak all at the same time and try to convince anyone that the season is not lost. It's 1-5 after all the changes that they made. I mean, listen, I understand that Brock is hurt. I understand that Colton got hurt. But if 2 injuries can undo all of the changes that they made this offseason, then they did not make as much progress as we all believed that they made. So, yes, Geno's got to get it together. I think he will. But at the same time, man, I've thought he would a couple of times, and it just hasn't happened yet. So we will see. Time will tell. But it's right. This is it. There is no way around it. They have to beat the Titans. If they don't beat the Titans, it's going to get real interesting. You're right back to halfway to that 10-game losing streak. You'd be at 5 with a away game at the Chiefs lined up next week. You got to beat the Titans. You got to beat the Titans. That's really what it comes down to. So, but that's enough for the offense. I mean, I think the offense's struggles, I think those get talked about, enough. Let's talk about the defense, really quickly. I think the main things for the defense is the loss of Jermaine Pratt is huge, which takes, I wrote an article about this as well, but, they had a chance to re-sign Divine Diablo, this offseason, and they let him walk for a very affordable price to the Atlanta Falcons. I think Diablo got a $14 million 2-year contract. I want to say $8 million of that is guaranteed. I could be a little bit off on the numbers, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. $14 million over 2 years, $8 million guaranteed. The Raiders had the first or second or third most available cap space, money to spend this past offseason. They could have afforded Divine Diablo. You went and go sign Jermaine Pratt and Jamal Adams for a fraction of the cost. Don't get me wrong, but it's the National Football League. You get what you pay for, and now without Pratt out there, you're down even more, right? So I know they believe Jamal Adams can do it. I believe he can too, but Divine Diablo was right there, and you don't find a linebacker with that skill set everywhere. Divine Diablos don't fall off of trees. You're talking about a defensive back converted to a linebacker that's still just as physical as a linebacker, but fast, but just as fast as a defensive back. Those are not falling off of trees, and that's not happening. You're not finding those too often. Now, Divine had his faults. Divine needed to be 100% healthy to be effective. There were times that Divine would take the wrong gap. He would shoot the wrong gap, and it would cost the Raiders. But all in all, they would have been better off with him than without him. And that just makes the loss of Jermaine Pratt even worse. Jermaine was legit. I mean, he was a fast dude. You hear Patrick Graham talk about him. Patrick Graham said, hey, it's going to be hard to replace that guy. It's going to take all 11. I think that tells you, that's not just coach speak. He's being honest with you. Like, it's going to take everybody to replace that guy in Jermaine Pratt, even though he wasn't with the team that long. So I do believe that is a huge loss, especially when you look at what the opposing offenses are doing to the Raiders linebacker core. They are literally picking on those guys week in and week out, and then they just gradually progress down the depth of the back end of the defense. So I mean, that's what the Colts did all last week. They got the defense into favorable situations, and then when the linebackers backed up enough, they dumped it off in front of them. When the linebackers came up to the line of scrimmage enough, they dumped it off right behind their heads because those linebackers are not necessarily the best in pass coverage. And the Colts took advantage of that. The Chargers took advantage of that. They're picking on the linebackers. And a lot of the plays that are happening this year on defense would not have happened if Divine Diablo was out there. And I am confident in saying that. It would not have happened if a healthy Divine Diablo was out there. So I always told people that Divine was an eraser. That eraser is gone. And now you're seeing a bunch of mistakes on the field. So that brings me to the next point of Eric Stokes. They need Eric Stokes. I believe he's going to be playing against the Titans. He looked better from what I saw, just looking at him walking around. Listen, Stokes is the best cover corner they have. Much like the Raiders offense struggled with, Colton Miller, they still struggled with Brock Bowers. The defensive backs, they still, even with Eric Stokes on the field, they still need help. So if he's not on the field, you do the math. So his return is huge. I think it's going to be interesting to see what these guys do. Honestly, guys, these are two 1-4 teams. There's only so much looking into the Titans that need to be done. They should be 0-5. They go look at their game last week. They had two plays that separately probably would never happen. And to see those two plays happen for the same team in the same season have to be slim to none. To see it happen, to see those two plays happen in a game, there's slim to none, and then there's a miracle, and that's the Titans are a miracle away from being 0-5. The Raiders have no excuses. I'll leave it at that. Las Vegas Raiders on SI, co-beat writer Ezekiel Trezevant. Please do me a favor, follow me on Twitter or X/Twitter, I guess I should say, EZT as in Tom, REZ _SI. Thank you guys. See you next week.